John Denver was a true American icon, bringing comfort and joy into our lives, leading us back to the country roads of West Virginia. His gentle voice, accompanied by a basic strum of the guitar, created more than mellow sounds. They created the backdrop to a simpler, more hopeful time in 1970s America. He became a symbol of American culture and hope, who inspired songs about the joy of nature that felt like a warm embrace. However, he did not pass this way gently, nor can we even say that he passed in an uncomplicated way. Impersonal aircraft fell out of the California sky and plunged in the Pacific Ocean, an incident that violently tore apart the simple, serene persona he had created. For many long years following, the formal report cited a tragic, regrettable accident, but that was not the whole story. When investigators pieced together what happened in Denver's last frantic moments, the story they constructed was far more complicated than a simple accident. It was examining troubling behavior of a troubled individual, alarming choices with an inoperable airplane at a time when he would last be expected to choose incorrect behaviors, turning a tragic demise into an inevitable ravage. The mystery behind the death of John Denver's exuberant and bright legacy has been untangled with a truth that was much darker and deeper than we all wanted to face. People thought they knew John Denver, the happy, mop-headed folk singer who seemed to just pop out of the heart of the Rocky Mountains. He had become a star, in a flash, after the Peter, Paul, and Mary version of Leaving on a Jet Plane went #1. Then he took the leap and became one of the biggest stars of the decade. His songs were everywhere, from the poignant tribute of Annie's Song to the joyous, "Thank God I'm a Country Boy." He was no longer just a singer, he was a brand. He hosted his own television specials, entrancing millions of audience members in their living rooms with his simple charm. He even appeared alongside the legendary George Burns in the feature film, Oh God. Clearly, his appeal reached beyond just music. He became an icon of the environmental movement long before it became fashionable, having created the WinStar Foundation to promote sustainability. He was so overwhelmingly embraced by the state of Colorado that he was named the Poet Laureate of that state. This was the legend of John Denver, a very tightly controlled archetype of wholesome, approachable optimism that Americans loved. Beneath his friendly face and warm tenor voice lay a perfect storm of personal anguish which, sadly, would soon destroy that myth. On the night of October 12, 1997, the news broke like an August hurricane, sending shockwaves and ripples of sorrow throughout the world. John Denver had died. Denver was flying his experimental plane, a streamlined, futuristic aircraft, when witnesses reported that it banking sharply before then nosedived into the peaceful aquamarine waters of Monterey Bay. The irony of the setting was clearly evident. It was a perfectly beautiful, tranquil day on this water that reflected exactly the scenes he wrote his songs about. Reports coming in that first night were simply a mix of utter confusion and speculation. He was a highly experienced pilot with thousands of hours of flight time. How could this happen? There was little substantive information, and of course, rumors began to fly, suggesting that he had suffered a sudden heart attack while flying a plane crash was a pretty clear indicator of serious mechanical failure. The world was left with an enormous emptiness and a myriad of unanswered questions. The Coast Guard's search was initially a rescue mission that turned into a recovery mission. Sad. The man who had sung so warmly and passionately about the magic of the sky had been seized by the sky rapidly and violently. The world mourned, and the larger mystery of what had actually happened last Sunday afternoon was only beginning to be revealed. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, began its painstaking investigation, and one critical fact raised ominous flags for investigators and was pointing them in the direction of a mechanical cause. The aircraft itself, a Longyearbyen, was a critical part of the mystery. This was not a familiar aircraft. Most people know of traditional factory-built aircraft like a Cessna or Piper Cub. The Longyearbyen is an experimental amateur-built aircraft, and therefore was not beholden to the same regulations and rigorous federal design standards. Though it was well regarded for its efficiency and innovative design, it had some quirks, one of which proved to be fatally risky. To switch the plane over from one fuel tank to another, the pilot was required to turn a small unidentified handle. The problem was, the builder of this specific airplane placed that handle behind the left shoulder of the pilot, completely out of sight. For the pilot, in order to check it, a pilot would need to take his hand off of the control, twist his body entirely to look for the valve, and in the meantime, fly the airplane blind for a few critical seconds. The original builder of the airplane wanted the handle to be moved and adjusted on the ground before taking off, not during flight. What a death trap for a pilot in an emergency! This one almost unbelievable design error practically set the stage for the tragedy and revealed the first shocking piece of the puzzle. John Denver was flying an aircraft that was both fundamentally dangerous and unnecessary. A defective machine was only one part of the story. Investigators' subsequent findings were even worse, but it shifted the blame onto the pilot himself. John Denver shouldn't have even been in that cockpit in the first place, and on one hand, he was recognized publicly as an experienced pilot who had a passion for the aviation world. But behind the scenes, the Federal Aviation Administration had officially disqualified him from flying any aircraft. He had lost his medical certificate, which is something that every pilot must have. His application for a new medical certificate was denied due to a serious history of alcohol use. He had been arrested several times for driving under the influence, and the FAA had serious concern about his judgment and reliability because they had very extensive documentation. He was not legally allowed to fly. This was a real bombshell that completely obliterated his public identity as a safe, responsible, nature-friendly hero. He was not simply a casualty of an unfortunate accident. He was a person who was engaged in an act that he consciously and willingly violated the law and took a great selfish risk in a high-performance experimental aircraft he barely even understood. When investigators began to unpack his private life, they started to understand why he was willing to make such a deadly and reckless gamble. The person flying that plane was not the calm and grounded person heard in his songs in the years leading up to his death. John Denver's personal journey was marked by utter turmoil. His first marriage, to Annie Martell, the muse of one of the most beautiful love songs ever written, ended in a hurtful and ugly divorce. The pressures of fame had placed an impenetrable chasm between them that love could not span. During the divorce process, his latent anger emerged in what was nothing less than middle-of-the-road dysfunction. Angry was not the word. Reports emerged that he entered their home with a chainsaw and cut their bed in half. To say this was dangerous and aggressive would be to downplay an extraordinary amount of anger that lay under his kind exterior. John's second marriage, to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney, was another collapsing relationship. Whirlwind romance ended in yet another painful public divorce. Denver himself expressed brutal honesty about the failure of this relationship when he said in an interview before our short-lived marriage ended in divorce, "She was able to fool me from one end of the valley to the other." That was not just heartbreak talking. That statement is a portrait of a man in psychological distress, a man who felt betrayed, alone, and unfathomably out of control. This represented a profoundly dangerous mental state for any individual, let alone the pilot of a powerful and unforgiving aircraft.